Chosen one. One of the most exhausting patterns you may have experienced in life is the constant feeling that you must explain yourself to others. It begins subtly, often with good intentions. You want to clarify misunderstandings, correct false assumptions, and help people see the sincerity of your heart. When someone questions your decisions, your growth, or your boundaries, your first instinct may be to respond patiently. You explain your reasoning, you share your perspective, and you hope that once people hear the full story, they will understand. At the beginning, this effort seems reasonable. Communication is often the bridge that resolves conflict. But for many chosen ones, something strange begins to happen over time. Despite your efforts to be clear and honest, the same misunderstandings continue appearing again and again. The same accusations resurface even after you have addressed them. The same people return with the same questions, as if your explanations were never spoken at all. Slowly, what once felt like a conversation begins to feel like a courtroom, where you are repeatedly asked to defend your character, your intentions, and even your personal growth. This cycle can quietly drain your emotional energy in ways that are difficult to describe. Many chosen ones spend years believing that the solution is simply better communication. They assume that if they choose the right words, present their intentions more clearly, or remain patient long enough, the misunderstanding will finally disappear. So they keep explaining. They clarify their motives when someone doubts them. They justify their boundaries when someone challenges them. They defend their growth when someone questions why they have changed. Yet with each explanation, the exhaustion grows heavier. Instead of resolution, the conversation seems to reset itself, repeating the same conflict in slightly different forms. The chosen one begins to feel as if they are walking on a treadmill of justification, constantly moving but never arriving anywhere. This emotional fatigue becomes one of the hidden burdens of spiritual growth. Because the chosen one values truth and integrity, it feels uncomfortable to allow false narratives to exist without correction. When someone misinterprets your intentions, you feel a natural urge to defend the truth. But the deeper issue is not the explanation itself. The deeper issue is the condition of the listener's heart. Some people approach conversations with genuine curiosity. They want to understand your journey, your perspective, and the reasons behind your decisions. With those people, explanation often leads to clarity and mutual respect. But other individuals approach conversations differently. They already carry assumptions about you, and their questions are shaped by those assumptions. Instead of listening with openness, they listen with suspicion. Instead of seeking understanding, they search for evidence that supports the story they have already decided to believe. In those situations, explanation becomes a one-sided effort. The chosen one speaks with sincerity, but the listener filters every word through doubt or criticism. Over time, the chosen one begins noticing patterns that reveal the true nature of these interactions. Some individuals repeatedly question your motives, even after you have clearly explained them. Others reinterpret your words in ways that twist your meaning. Some appear to listen carefully, only to return later with the exact same accusations, as if the previous conversation never happened. At first, this behavior can feel confusing. You may wonder if you failed to explain yourself clearly enough. You may question whether you said something wrong, but eventually a difficult realization begins forming within you. The misunderstanding may not be accidental. Some people are not struggling to understand you. They are choosing not to. This realization can feel painful because it challenges the hope that honest communication always leads to resolution. But the truth is that not every misunderstanding is based on confusion. Some misunderstandings are intentional. Some individuals cling to a negative narrative because it allows them to maintain a sense of superiority, control, or emotional comfort. If they accepted the truth about your intentions, they would also have to reconsider their own behavior toward you. For many people, protecting their ego feels easier than admitting they misjudged someone. The chosen one eventually begins recognizing how deeply this cycle has drained their peace. Conversations that should have lasted minutes stretch into hours. Emotional energy that could have been invested in growth becomes trapped in endless defense. Instead of focusing on the path God is guiding them toward, the chosen one becomes entangled in attempts to correct other people's perceptions. This constant effort to be understood can quietly erode your sense of stability. The more you try to prove your sincerity, the more you feel responsible for how others interpret your life. But one of the most important lessons the chosen one eventually learns is that your responsibility is not to control other people's perceptions. Your responsibility is to remain faithful to the truth God placed within your heart. Scripture reminds us that while human beings often judge based on outward appearances, God examines the heart itself. He sees intentions that no explanation could fully capture. He understands motives that others may never recognize. When the chosen one truly grasps this truth, a subtle but powerful shift begins happening within them. They start realizing that the need to constantly defend themselves comes from a desire for human approval that God never required. Once this understanding settles into the spirit, the exhaustion begins to lift. The chosen one learns that clarity has value, but it must be offered to those who are willing to receive it. When someone refuses to listen with sincerity, explanation becomes wasted energy. And in that moment, the chosen one begins discovering a new kind of freedom. The freedom that comes from knowing that God already understands the truth of your heart, even when the world chooses not to. As the chosen one begins recognizing how exhausting constant explanation can be, another layer of truth slowly reveals itself. The problem is not always misunderstanding. Sometimes, the real issue behind the endless questions is control. There are people who repeatedly demand explanations, not because they want to understand your perspective, but because they want to maintain influence over your choices. At first, this can be difficult for the chosen one to recognize, because the questions themselves may appear reasonable on the surface. Someone may ask why you made a certain decision, why you set a particular boundary, or why you have changed the direction of your life. These questions can sound like concern or curiosity, but over time, the pattern begins revealing something deeper. No matter how clearly you answer, the conversation never reaches resolution. Instead of moving forward, the discussion circles back again and again to the same challenge. The chosen one may explain their reasoning, only to find the explanation dismissed or questioned again. Eventually, it becomes clear that the issue is not clarity at all. The issue is that your independence is unsettling to someone who once felt comfortable having influence over your life. When a chosen one begins growing spiritually, emotionally, or mentally, the people around them often respond in different ways. Some celebrate the growth and support the new direction. Others feel uneasy because the changes disrupt the dynamics they were used to. If someone was accustomed to influencing your decisions, your growth may feel like a loss of control to them. Instead of openly admitting this discomfort, they may begin questioning your choices in ways that subtly pressure you to doubt yourself. The repeated demand for explanation becomes a strategy to slow your progress. Each question forces you to pause and justify your direction instead of confidently continuing forward. For the chosen one, this dynamic can be confusing at first. You may assume the person is simply struggling to understand your new perspective, so you patiently explain your reasoning again. You describe what you have learned, what you feel God is guiding you toward, and why certain boundaries are necessary for your peace. But rather than accepting the explanation, the person introduces another objection. The conversation shifts from curiosity to challenge. Suddenly, your decisions are being examined as if they require approval before they can be valid. This is where the chosen one begins recognizing that the discussion was never truly about understanding. It was about influence. When someone cannot control your choices directly, they may attempt to control the conversation surrounding those choices. By demanding repeated explanations, they position themselves as the judge of your decisions. If you continue engaging in this cycle, you unintentionally give them authority over your peace. Every new explanation becomes another opportunity for them to question your confidence. This is why the chosen one eventually realizes that endless explanation can become a subtle form of manipulation. What appears to be dialogue is actually a negotiation over your independence. The more you defend your decisions, the more the other person feels entitled to evaluate them. Over time, this dynamic can quietly weaken your clarity. Instead of trusting the direction God is leading you, you begin second-guessing yourself in response to constant scrutiny. But spiritual growth inevitably changes the structure of relationships. As the chosen one matures, certain people can no longer occupy the same position in their life that they once held. This shift does not necessarily mean conflict must occur, but it does require boundaries. When someone realizes they can no longer influence you in the same way as before, they may attempt to regain that influence through conversation. The chosen one must learn to recognize when explanation is no longer productive. Jesus himself encountered this dynamic during his ministry. Many people approached him with sincere curiosity, and he responded with wisdom and patience. But others approached with hidden motives. They asked questions not because they wanted truth, but because they hoped to trap him or challenge his authority. In those moments, Jesus did not engage in endless defense. He recognized the difference between sincere questions and dishonest ones. This example becomes an important lesson for the chosen one. Not every question deserves a detailed response. Not every challenge requires you to prove your intentions. Sometimes, the wisest response is recognizing the true purpose behind the conversation. When explanation becomes a tool for control, continuing the discussion only strengthens that control. The chosen one gradually learns that protecting their peace requires discernment. Communication is valuable when both sides are genuinely open to understanding. But when someone repeatedly moves the goalposts of the conversation, the chosen one must recognize the pattern and step away from it. Your purpose is not to convince every person to approve of your path. Your responsibility is to remain faithful to the direction God has placed before you. As this realization settles in, the chosen one begins reclaiming the energy that was once spent defending every decision. Instead of constantly proving themselves to others, they start walking forward with quiet confidence. They understand that growth inevitably challenges the expectations of those who are comfortable with the old version of them. And while some people will respect that growth, others will resist it. The chosen one learns that resistance from others does not mean they are on the wrong path. Sometimes, it simply means they have stepped beyond someone else's control. As the chosen one begins recognizing that some conversations are driven more by control than by genuine curiosity, another important realization gradually takes shape. Not every situation requires more explanation. In fact, there comes a point where wisdom is no longer found in speaking more, but in speaking less. This shift can feel uncomfortable at first, because many chosen ones are naturally inclined toward honesty and clarity. When someone questions your intentions or challenges your decisions, your instinct may still be to respond thoughtfully and provide understanding. For much of your life, communication may have been your way of maintaining peace in relationships. But over time, God begins teaching a deeper form of wisdom, one that understands the value of silence. Silence, in this context, is not weakness, and it is not avoidance. It is the recognition that truth does not always need to be defended in every conversation. When someone repeatedly refuses to listen with sincerity, continuing to explain yourself often becomes an act that drains your energy without producing understanding. The chosen one slowly learns that every explanation is an investment of emotional and spiritual energy. When that energy is given to someone who is unwilling to receive it with honesty, the conversation becomes unbalanced. Instead of building clarity, it begins eroding peace. Many chosen ones reach a moment where they realize they have spent far too much time trying to defend themselves against accusations that were never meant to be resolved. In those moments, silence becomes a powerful boundary. It communicates something deeper than words ever could. It signals that you no longer feel responsible for correcting every false assumption or every distorted narrative about your life. The truth of who you are does not change simply because someone chooses not to see it. When the chosen one stops responding to every challenge or accusation, something surprising often happens. The dynamic of the relationship begins shifting. People who are accustomed to provoking explanations may become uncomfortable when those explanations stop coming. The silence removes the stage where arguments once played out. It removes the opportunity for endless debate. Instead of continuing the cycle of defense and accusation, the chosen one steps outside the pattern entirely. This is where many people misunderstand the power of silence. They assume silence means surrender, but in reality, it often represents strength. It is the strength to recognize when further explanation will not create peace. It is the strength to value your inner stability more than someone else's approval. And it is the strength to trust that the truth does not require constant performance to remain valid. For the chosen one, this shift is often accompanied by a deeper sense of emotional freedom. Conversations that once consumed hours of mental energy simply no longer occur. Situations that once provoked anxiety lose their power because you are no longer participating in the same cycle. Instead of rehearsing explanations in your mind, you begin focusing on the path God is guiding you toward. Silence creates space where your attention can return to your purpose instead of becoming trapped in endless justification. Scripture offers a powerful example of this principle through the life of Jesus. During his trial, he faced accusations that were deeply unfair and completely false. Yet, there were moments when he chose not to respond at all. Those who accused him expected defense and argument, but his silence carried a deeper authority. It demonstrated that truth does not depend on convincing every critic. Sometimes, truth simply stands, unshaken by the noise surrounding it. This example becomes an important lesson for the chosen one. There is a difference between answering sincere questions and defending yourself against accusations rooted in dishonesty. Wisdom lies in recognizing the difference. When someone approaches with genuine openness, conversation can lead to understanding and growth. But when someone approaches with a closed heart, continuing the conversation may only deepen conflict. Silence becomes the boundary that protects your peace from unnecessary battles. As this understanding grows, the chosen one also begins noticing something else. Not everyone deserves access to your explanations. Sharing your thoughts, your reasoning, and your spiritual journey is an intimate act of trust. When someone repeatedly uses that information to challenge or undermine you, it becomes clear that the relationship lacks the respect required for healthy communication. Choosing silence in those moments is not an act of hostility. It is an act of self-respect and spiritual maturity. Over time, the chosen one becomes more selective about where their words are invested. Instead of explaining themselves to every critic, they begin reserving their voice for conversations that actually lead to understanding. This shift transforms the way they move through life. Their words carry greater weight because they are no longer wasted on endless arguments. Their peace becomes stronger because it is no longer tied to other people's interpretations. And slowly, the chosen one discovers a powerful truth. Silence, when guided by wisdom, can protect your spirit in ways that explanation never could. As the chosen one learns the power of silence and begins stepping away from endless explanations, a deeper spiritual truth begins settling into the heart. The peace you are protecting does not come from convincing every person to understand you. It comes from realizing that the one who truly matters already knows the truth about you. Long before anyone formed an opinion about your life, God already saw your intentions, your struggles, and the sincerity behind your decisions. Human beings often judge situations through limited perspectives. They interpret events based on fragments of information, personal biases, past experiences, or emotions that cloud their judgment. But God sees the entire picture at once. He understands the motivations that guided your choices, the lessons you learned through hardship, and the faith that carried you through seasons where no one else fully understood what you were facing. For the chosen one, this realization becomes a powerful anchor during moments of misunderstanding. When people misinterpret your intentions, it can create an emotional tension that tempts you to defend yourself. The instinct to correct false narratives feels natural because truth matters to you.
But when your identity begins anchoring itself in God's understanding rather than human approval, the urgency to defend yourself slowly fades. You begin recognizing that no human explanation could ever capture the complete story that God already knows. Every prayer you whispered in moments of uncertainty, every quiet act of integrity when no one was watching, every decision made out of obedience rather than comfort, all of it was witnessed by God. Nothing about your journey has been invisible to Him, even if it remained unseen by others. Many chosen ones spend years trying to reconcile the gap between who they truly are and how others perceive them. It can feel deeply frustrating when people form opinions based on assumptions rather than truth. Someone may misunderstand your intentions, question your growth, or reduce your story to a simplified version that ignores everything you have been through. At first, this gap can feel like an injustice that needs to be corrected. But over time, the chosen one begins discovering a different form of peace. The realization emerges that human understanding will always be incomplete. No matter how clearly you explain your story, people will still interpret it through their own filters of belief, insecurity, and expectation. This is why the chosen one eventually learns to rest in God's judgment rather than human approval. Scripture teaches that the Lord searches the heart and examines motives. Unlike human judgment, which often focuses on appearances or rumors, God evaluates the intentions behind every action. He sees the courage it took to grow beyond old patterns. He understands the strength required to walk away from environments that were harming your spirit. He knows the sincerity of your desire to follow the path He placed before you. When this truth becomes real in the heart of the chosen one, it changes the way you respond to misunderstanding. Instead of feeling pressured to correct every accusation, you begin trusting that the truth of your life does not depend on universal agreement. Your peace no longer rises or falls based on how accurately others interpret your journey. Instead, it becomes rooted in the quiet confidence that God already knows the full story. This shift brings an unexpected freedom. The chosen one begins releasing the heavy burden of trying to manage every perception surrounding their life. They stop measuring their worth through the approval of people who may never understand them. Instead, they focus on remaining faithful to the path God has set before them. This does not mean the pain of misunderstanding disappears completely. Human relationships still matter, and moments of misjudgment can still sting. But the chosen one begins responding differently to those situations. Instead of reacting with urgency or defensiveness, they step back and remember where their identity truly comes from. God's understanding becomes the foundation that steadies them when human opinions fluctuate. As this realization grows stronger, something else begins changing as well. The chosen one becomes less concerned with proving themselves and more focused on living authentically before God. Their decisions are guided by purpose rather than by the need for validation. Their confidence grows quieter but stronger because it is no longer dependent on being fully understood by everyone around them. In this place of spiritual clarity, misunderstanding loses much of its power. People may still form opinions, but those opinions no longer control the chosen one's sense of identity. The truth of who they are rests in God's knowledge of their heart. And when that truth becomes the center of your life, the need to constantly explain yourself begins fading into the background. When the chosen one finally reaches the moment where they stop explaining themselves to people determined not to understand, something powerful begins to unfold within their life. At first, the change may feel subtle. It is not loud or dramatic. It is simply the quiet return of peace
that had been slowly drained by years of unnecessary defense. For so long, the Chosen One may have felt responsible for correcting every misunderstanding, clarifying every assumption, and defending every decision. That constant effort can quietly consume enormous emotional energy. Every explanation becomes another attempt to gain acceptance or restore fairness in a situation that was never balanced to begin with. But when the Chosen One finally releases that responsibility, a new form of freedom begins to appear. The mind becomes quieter. The constant rehearsing of explanations disappears. The emotional weight of trying to control other people's perceptions slowly lifts. What replaces it is clarity. Instead of investing energy into defending your path, you begin investing it into walking that path with confidence. The Chosen One realizes that life moves forward far more peacefully when energy is directed toward purpose rather than toward endless justification. This freedom often surprises many Chosen Ones because they spent so many years believing that peace required everyone to understand them. They believed harmony would only exist once the truth was fully recognized by every person involved. But reality begins teaching a different lesson. Peace does not come from universal agreement. It comes from alignment with God's direction. Once the Chosen One accepts that some people will never understand their journey, the emotional struggle to change those opinions begins dissolving. That acceptance does not come from bitterness or resentment. It comes from maturity. It is the understanding that every person views the world through their own experiences, beliefs, and insecurities. Some people simply do not have the perspective required to understand the transformation that has taken place in your life. And that is not your burden to fix. As this realization deepens, the Chosen One begins noticing a new confidence growing within them. It is not arrogance, and it is not the desire to prove anything. It is a quiet certainty that comes from trusting the direction God has placed before them. Instead of constantly seeking validation, they move forward with calm assurance. Their decisions are guided by faith, rather than by the fear of being misunderstood. Their boundaries become stronger because they no longer feel obligated to justify them to everyone who questions them. This shift also changes how the Chosen One approaches relationships. Instead of trying to convince every person to understand them, they begin recognizing the difference between those who genuinely listen and those who only challenge. The people who are meant to walk beside you in your journey rarely require endless explanation. They may ask questions out of curiosity or care, but their intention is understanding rather than control. With those individuals, conversation flows naturally and mutual respect grows stronger. The Chosen One begins valuing those relationships more deeply because they are built on sincerity rather than on constant defense. At the same time, the Chosen One becomes comfortable allowing certain people to remain confused about them. This can feel strange at first, especially for someone who once tried so hard to clarify every misunderstanding. But over time, it becomes liberating. Not every opinion deserves correction. Not every narrative requires your participation. Sometimes, the most peaceful response is simply allowing others to believe whatever version of your story they choose, while you continue walking forward in truth. This is where spiritual maturity reveals itself most clearly. The Chosen One no longer measures their worth by how accurately others interpret them. Instead, they measure their life by their faithfulness to God. Scripture reminds believers that seeking human approval can easily distract from serving God's purpose. When your focus shifts toward obedience rather than validation, your path becomes clearer. You are no longer pulled in multiple directions by the expectations of others. You become grounded in the understanding that your responsibility is not to satisfy every opinion, but to remain faithful to the calling God has placed within your life. The freedom that comes from this shift cannot be overstated. The Chosen One begins experiencing a level of peace that once seemed impossible. Arguments that once consumed energy no longer occur. Accusations that once provoked defense now pass without shaking your spirit.
Instead of explaining your identity repeatedly, you simply live it. Your actions, your consistency, and your character speak more clearly than any explanation ever could. And slowly, you realize something profound. The people who are meant to understand you will see your heart without requiring endless clarification. Those relationships grow naturally because they are rooted in respect and sincerity. Everyone else fades into the background of your journey. And as you continue walking forward with quiet confidence, the chosen one discovers that true freedom begins the moment you stop explaining your life to people who were never willing to understand it in the first place. Chosen one, if this message spoke to your heart, take a moment to reflect on how much peace comes when you stop explaining yourself to those who refuse to understand. Your journey with God is not meant to be justified to everyone, only lived with faith and courage. If this message encouraged you, make sure to like the video, share it with someone who may need this reminder today, and subscribe to the channel for more messages created for the chosen ones walking their purpose. Your support helps this message reach others who are searching for clarity, strength, and God's guidance in their life.